I wonder if you've done a New Year's resolution or about to do a New Year's resolution for 2021. Lots of people do resolutions based on some of the things that have happened in the past, and maybe a bit like me, you've probably overindulged a little in the Christmas festivities and looking to maybe shed a couple of kilos, or maybe looking to do something new. Maybe you're just trying to change some habits of the past or create some new opportunities. Do you create New Year's resolutions, though, out of a sense of God's bountiful nature? Do you create New Year's resolutions out of the generosity of God and the way that God continues to offer an abundance of His love, His hope, His peace, and His joy for you, for your family, for our communities, and for our world? See, God is a generous God. God offers a great abundance, a great hope for the whole world. We're incredibly fortunate, aren't we, in Australia, to live out of this abundance. Probably we don't recognise it enough and give thanks to God for all that God has given. But in fact, this abundance comes right through all the stories of God's people. We can see it so clearly in some of those wonderful stories. I think of the story of Abraham and Sarah, a couple who in their later ages, still not having children, and yet a God who promises them more descendants than the stars. He is an abundant God who, of course, fulfills that promise, even though at the time they were childless. Abundance, God's plenty is out there for us. But sometimes we choose, I think, to live out of a sense of paucity, out of a sense of what we don't have. But there's a warning, isn't there, from the Gospel of Matthew today, the story that Jesus tells the people about the sheep and the goats, the God who will judge those people. In the story, of course, people are judged on how they have demonstrated, how they have shared, how they have lived out of the abundance that God has given them. Jesus warns them that if they want to live out of that sense of paucity, if they don't go and feed the hungry, share what they have with those who are lost and lonely, share what they have with those captives, then they, in fact, are disobeying God themselves. That when they don't do that, they disappoint a God who has given abundantly to them in the first place. It's this abundant nature of God that we see repeated time and time again. This God who offers us so much and then calls us to share it. God also calls us into the new ways of sharing this abundance. As we think about the new year, we think about the opportunities that we have to do things differently, to find new ways of sharing mission and ministry into the world. Our Project Plenty, Shared Life, Flourishing Communities, is another way that we as a church want to engage in the world around us, want to share the abundance of God with our communities and indeed into our world. Through our project, we'll have lots of opportunities to explore new ways of being God's people. New ways to find those spaces that we might offer the abundance of God's hope for us, the good news of Jesus that comes for all of us. Project Plenty will be an opportunity for us to think anew, to think in a renewed way as a church who has survived the past year in all the horrors that we have seen, in all the ways that it has been one of those years that we will never forget. Project Plenty will take us from that and say, as we engage in this new year, let's be a church that engages in new ways. It was great to see during the past year so many churches who engage in worship in creative ways. So many of our agencies and our hospitals, our schools, who found new ways to be the people of God, to continue to share the message, to continue to do the programs, but in creative ways, in exciting ways that continue to show the abundant love, the abundant resources, and the abundant hope that we had for the world going forward. As we start to engage this new year, the challenge for us is to be open and receptive to all these new possibilities that God has for us. As we engage in this new year, the challenge will be to allow us to leave some of the past behind. You know, the writer of the book of Revelation talks about a great new hope that he sees coming from God. A new world. A world where there is no more pain, where there is no more suffering. God challenges us even now to start to build that new world. To start to be engaged in this new way of being God's people. As we start this new year, 2021, I pray that you will be able to take up the challenge of being God's people in new and creative ways, opening yourselves to the possibility of those new things that will happen in your midst. Maybe you will have to put some things away that you've done in the past, as we say goodbye to the past and look to the future. Maybe your challenges will be to be a people that is on the move. People that's not sitting still in a one spot, but in creating in new and exciting opportunities, maybe in online platforms, in new ways of serving our God. As we come to 2021, we say farewell to the year that was. We acknowledge the pain and the suffering of many. But we now look to the future with hope. And we do so because of God's abundant love, God's abundant grace, and God's abundant hope that drives us into God's future. So as we engage this new year, I pray that you will re-engage with our God, that you will make your covenant with God, that you will be a people on the journey. A pilgrim people, always on the way, looking for the new hope, the new possibilities, the new ways to share this plentiful love of our God. And may you know the blessing of God who continues to surround you now and always. Amen.